afternoon, friends and viewers. I am Reverend Chantel Hinton Hill. I am an equity officer for the Winthrop Rockefeller Foundation. And we are hosting this wonderful gathering, this conversation series called The Greatest of These, which will launch hopefully a new initiative of faith leaders who will be a part of a cohort called the Micah Fellows Program of faith leaders who are dedicated to economic justice in the state. I am so happy to be joined today with my people, as my friend Furonda said so beautifully just a moment ago, people who are going to talk today about mass incarceration and the criminalization of poverty. I'm joined by my brother, the Right Reverend Ryan Davis, who is serving as a coordinator for the Micah Fellows Program, which you will hear more about in the coming days. With that, I'm going to hand it over to my friend Ryan, who will introduce us to our wonderful panelists for today and get us into conversation. Take it away, Ryan.
Thank you. Thank you to my good friend, the Reverend Chantel Hinton Hill. And let me say this, the guiding text for this fellowship, for our time together, asks a question and gives an answer. It says, he's showed you what's good and what the Lord requires of you, that you do justly, that you love mercy, and that you walk humbly with your guide. And that will inform, in the broad sense, this fellowship, but also this conversation. Today, we're talking about mass incarceration and the injustice therein. How do we make that connection between justice, love, mercy, and humility when we're talking about mass incarceration? Let me introduce our panel. Glad to have with us today all folks who, one of whom I just met, but all of whom I consider friends. Calandra Davis, a member of the Jackson, Mississippi's Better Together Commission, an activist, a policy analyst at the Hope Policy Institute, and the author of January 13th white paper that examines the intersection between criminal justice and financial services in the Deep South. Welcome to you, Calandra Davis, my cousin, Calandra Davis. Welcome also to Reverend John Vaughn. Reverend Vaughn is the former executive vice president at Auburn Theological Seminary, one of our partners in this coming fellowship. He's also the former minister for education and social justice at the historical Riverside Church in New York City. He is currently the executive pastor of the historic Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta, Georgia. Welcome to you, Reverend Vaughn. And then my recent travel buddy, we came through the torrential rains together, Furonda Brasfield. She is the Rural Practice Incubator Project attorney with offices here in Little Rock, Arkansas, and in Stuttgart. She's also the former executive director of the Arkansas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. Glad she's able to be here with us. Very busy schedule. Thank you, Furonda. And certainly last but not least, somebody who did not think it robbery to interrupt his writing sabbatical to be with us today, my good friend, Brother Crow, Zachary Crow, the executive director of Decarcerate, Arkansas. And Decarcerate, brothers and sisters, is a nonprofit working to affirm human dignity by confronting unjust systems. Decarcerate envisions a world where equity, healing, and reconciliation replace systems of punishment and oppression. Wanted to make sure I said those things about decarcerate because that will guide in some ways our discussion, our conversation here today. So again, siblings, we're talking about mass incarceration. We're talking about mass incarceration in the state of Arkansas, which is increasingly becoming one of the largest incarcerators of people per capita in the world. In a state where we are beginning to spend nearly 50% more per prisoner due to our relationship with private prisons in this state. One of the states that Calandra Davis you got to say a name together, got to say both names, has in her very important paper noted it's one of the 6 states with the highest levels of incarceration. And so I'll begin our discussion today with just this. Considering our experts, I'll call this a softball. So for our panelists, many people are unaware of the links between mass incarceration and the for-profit prison industrial system. Zachary, I invite you first to explain in your own way this connection.
Yeah, well, I think we've got to start with slavery, right? I think from the very beginning, the prison system has been rooted in and built on the exploitation of labor and the financial incentive of co-opting that forced labor. We get pretty quickly to convict leasing, where Black and brown folks are arrested en masse and rented out to private industry. And we still see the effects of that today through prison farms and into present day, where in Arkansas, folks bring in millions upon millions of dollars to the system and are compensated $0.00 for that forced labor. I was just on a call with a dear friend who described his time in the Department of Correction and how he was sent to solitary confinement for refusing to pick cotton for white men on horseback with shotguns. So I think first we've got to talk about the kind of financial incentive that comes from exploiting and warehousing human bodies and the labor that comes from that. But we've also got to talk about all of the ways in which the system is sort of intertwined. Not only are there private prisons that make money on the number of people who are in the cells, but we've got all other kinds of privatized probation and parole, right? This is the new form of privatization. Somebody's making money on that ankle monitor, right? And so not only do we have financial incentive to keep people in prison, but we now have financial incentive to keep people on probation, parole, keep people on paper, right? For longer and longer periods of time. And so when we talk specifically about private prisons, which I think was your question, Arkansas has a long history. Arkansas, where I live, has a long history of private prisons. We got rid of private prisons in Arkansas because there were scandals of abuse and corruption. And in Arkansas, we currently don't have a private prison in the traditional sense, but we know that one is coming, and that is going to change very quickly. There are counties who have come together to form a private regional jail that the Department of Correction, that the prison will rent bed space from. So we're about to have a private prison masquerading as a jail. I think I've said some things. I'm gonna stop there and let somebody else chime in.
Yeah, absolutely. Calandra, if you don't mind, just in response to that same question, what are some of the links that we, now as a policy analyst, I mean, you can very readily make these links, but what are some of the links that we, just regular citizens, we need to be aware of, that we need to be aware of making between, mass incarceration and prisons in general, but for-profit prisons in particular, and the, kind of the wave of effects of those places even existed.
Okay, got you. And are you asking the links between prisons in general and economics, or just, yeah, got you. All right, just wanted to be clear. So yeah, prisons in general, private prisons, of course, but the entire complex, the entire system is an economic issue as well. You really can't talk about one without talking about the other. And that's because prisons in this system, they exploit the labor of people in order for the system to thrive. A lot of our corporations, our businesses are tied to prison labor. And so it's key that we recognize that because those prisons have to be filled in order for us to keep that labor going. And it's not just cheap labor, it's slave labor. Also, outside of that, we have this system that is set up so that and even before we get to the prison level, we can talk about fines and fees. We can talk about criminal justice debt. Again, the entire system is created in a way to where either someone has to make money, someone is making money from it. And it's usually not those who are impacted that are making the money. And so while there's even restitution funds, even victims are not getting the bulk of the money from the systems that's set up. And so it starts out where you have people, and usually those who are poor, they're not able to pay these fines and fees, they're not able to pay this debt, and then it pushes them right back into the system. And sometimes it pushes them deeper into the system. And so that means now because of a speeding ticket that I wasn't able to pay, I might end up having to serve jail time and so forth and so on. And so, and it just keeps getting deeper and it's more entrenched. And I stop there because I know there's more we have to talk about, but just really want people to understand how much this actually intersects and how much this entire system is extracting money from really poor Black and Brown communities. In order to uphold the government system, the governmental system, in order to uphold private corporations as well.
Furonda, you and I know we've had a similar conversation recently about how things like poor record keeping in courts can exacerbate some of the challenges around stuff like fines and fees. And can you talk a little bit about how, just the effect that has on poor people in particular, that defendants, who have no way of tracking the total debt that they owe, or have no way of tracking whether or not their payments are properly applied to outstanding debt, how ineffective systems exacerbate poverty in that way.
Well, our system is ineffective. Let me start by saying that our system is ineffective, and let me say that it's from the beginning of the system. It's set up to oppress. Someone is, you've always heard, you're innocent until you're proven guilty, but that is so untrue. We start with, if you're accused of somebody can point the finger at you, Reverend Davis, today and say that you did something, and then you're gonna have to go to jail and you have to pay to get out. So we're gonna start there. You pay to get out, you need to hire an attorney to represent you. You've got to take time off work to go back and forth to court. So before you ever get to trying to keep the records that can get you a failure to appear, or keeping up with the court dates, you have a myriad of new issues that we are often propounding on top of poverty. So we are oppressing people on an accusation. Is what we're doing. And then we expect them to be able to keep up with the court dates and take off time from work and take more time from and money from your family and your livelihood to do that. And if you fail, if this mountain of pressure that we have put on you based upon an accusation, if you fail, then we're going to add additional fees. We're going to charge you failure to appear. You may have you didn't come to court, and so now you've got a warrant out for your arrest, and you're having a great day with your family driving down the road. The police stop you for whatever they stop you for, and now you got to go to jail. So now you've got a bond or bail out of jail again, and you've got further time off from work. Your whole family life has been disrupted. So the system is certainly ineffective. I think that the pandemic has shown us some of the things that, and some of the changes that we can make, and people can attend court via Zoom and talk teleconference to the judge, and can show up, and there can be some lenience in the system that is oppressing people with the stringent rules and regulations.
And if I can stay with you, particularly Calandra and Furonda, if you'll indulge me just for one more second. Just want to know in brief, how does mass incarceration, if you can for our viewing audience, help us understand how mass incarceration and the systems therein disproportionately impact particular communities, folks who live with their backs against the wall in Arkansas, in the Delta. I know that a part of what your paper addresses, Calandra, are 6 particular states. And, we have on the line folks representing half of those states, someone from Mississippi, and you, Calandra, someone in Georgia, Reverend Vaughn, and the rest of us here in Arkansas. So if we can talk just a bit about how mass incarceration disproportionately impacts particular communities and some of the details of that.
Yeah, I can start. So, and Zachary hit on this a little bit already. That this isn't, anything new, that there's a history that's tied to this system. There's a history that's tied to how Black people are disproportionately targeted by this system. And that history dates back to slavery. And as you mentioned, I'm in Mississippi right now. I've lived in Arkansas. I've worked in both the Arkansas and the Mississippi Delta. I have family in both. And so I think what's really important here, again, is to understand how this kind of got started. There's a notorious prison in Mississippi called Parchman that's in the Mississippi Delta. And a lot of laws, from the Black codes to pig laws, to where Black people were after slavery. They were like, we really don't want y'all to be free. And so we got to come up with another system. We got to do something a little bit differently to make sure that y'all can remain enslaved. And so they created all of these laws where they targeted Black folks for very small things, for loitering, and they made offenses like stealing a pig, where the pig laws come in to play. They would give folks 5 years in prison for things like that. And then, thanks to the 13th Amendment, those who were imprisoned were essentially enslaved again. And so that hasn't stopped. It looks a little differently. And I don't know what, the laws or what the city council is doing where y'all are located, but I know even here in Mississippi, we're still fighting this. We still have decision makers and policy makers who are discussing what does it look like to arrest people for misdemeanors. What does it look like to arrest people for driving their four-wheelers or for firing a gun? And so we're still not getting to the root cause of any of the violence that we may be seeing happening in our communities. Instead, we're just adding to this larger system. And so, again, that the history that's tied to it. And then those of us, and a lot of people, there's one come and go. We want to live in safe communities.
Yeah.
And because we haven't seen anything outside of this system, because it's hard for a lot of people to imagine what safety could look like outside of this system, we tend to just continue those old laws. We tend to replicate them and continue to carry them out. And so Black people and people of color and brown folks, they continue to be disproportionately targeted by the system.
Reverend Vaughn, as I consider what both Furonda and what Calandra said, you know, I think it begs the question, especially, you know, the nexus of this conversation is really about how we as people of faith, varying faith, little to great, how do we confront this? What is our responsibility? And I know that requires a little bit of projection because there are some folks who probably believe that that's not our responsibility. You know, but what or where has the church, has institutional religion been complicit or perhaps even just silent? And what role, if any, does the church and our faith communities have in addressing toward ending mass incarceration? What say ye?
Thanks for what you say ye. Well, I think at times that we've been comfortable more in terms of the visitation, but oftentimes have not been as comfortable around the advocacy work. But, you know, look, we are the people of second chances. We are the people of forgiveness. We are the people of, you know, we believe in a savior who gives people a second and third and a fourth chance from a Christian standpoint. And that love is a tenet that crosses all faith traditions. So what's been important, what we've been engaged with has been with Ebenezer Baptist Church, the Temple in Atlanta, Odyssey Impact out of New York, and a bunch of other faith partners throughout the country, is we've now seeded a multi-faith initiative to end mass incarceration, because we believe that the faith community can play a catalytic role around both the moral voice, but also be one of the both advocacy partners, but also can be one of the partners in terms of eliminating the school to prison pipeline, and that which is feeding this beast of mass incarceration. And so for us, we're committed to getting more congregations engaged around this work. You know, in some cases, we have churches that are involved in bailouts as a way to shine a light on the injustices of the bail system. We ourselves have done expungement events, because when you expunge your record, it allows people then flexibility to be eligible for employment, to be able to help their families. Where we're looking at ways to shift the narrative, the way that we talk about mass incarceration, the narratives, the theology publicly, and also want to engage faith communities, you know, in the advocacy work. We can be, and we have been, advocacy partners. And so actually what's exciting for us is we have begun conversations in Arkansas, and would love to begin to find ways that we can add value and support the multi-faith community within Arkansas to begin to really up its engagement around ending mass incarceration.
You know, Reverend Vaughn, you said something that's really prompted this next question in my mind, if you don't mind.
Mm-hmm.
You know, because I know for a fact that a lot of folks think that they have biblical mandate, or that there is rather biblical mandate to imprison folks. That there's something in the Christian ethos that leads us to believe that, you know, what we're doing is just, or that this is justice. And so I feel like that's something that we're up against. Reverend Dr. Teresa Smallwood said in a conversation that those of us who are concerned with justice for real are really working beneath our means, or that we are, you know, we have more means. And so I guess my question is, what can be said from the perspective of your theology, from a theology connected to justice? What it say in the Bible?
Well, look, I think the Bible is also replete with stories about, you know, Matthew 25, where it talks about the visiting people within prison. And if you're not visiting people, then maybe you weren't on the right side. Jesus's own words at the beginning of his ministry are about proclaiming release to the captives. When you look at even the story of someone, like a Moses, who was actually a murderer, but actually had a second chance, and got a second chance to really fulfill his calling. So, I think we have a number of stories where people, where there is a sense of the second and the third chance and new opportunities. And so it is important for us to not focus on, you make one bad act and literally we're going to bury you for the rest of your lives.
Mm-hmm.
That's essentially, when you hear what the previous speakers have talked about, it's, the current system is you make a mistake, or we think you made a mistake, and we're going to bury you. You're going to behind the 8 ball. And then when you layer onto that, this, some of the challenges of seeing people of color sometimes less than. So let's be clear. That's also part of the dynamic. When folks don't really quite see you as fully human, then there's a way in which folks feel that they can treat you. And so that's also part of what's got to be addressed and named and unpacked in this. And that part of what we do as people of faith is we affirm the full humanity of each and every person, that God has created all of us to be our authentic selves, to be people of integrity, to be people worthy of God's love and God's second chances and third chances and fourth chances, and believes in the essential goodness that is there, that has been God within each of us, that has been created.
Absolutely. Which then prompts another prayer for me. And, because I think a large part of the discussion around mass incarceration over the past decade has been propelled by the fact that you see, from every corner of, well, let me just say it plainly, you see so-called conservatives who are who have expressed some interest in dealing with what they think of as prison reform, as stymieing the tide of. I think some of them, have some very libertarian kind of cost associated proclivities, and that's what they're concerned about. And as I think about cost, I think, of course, about the criminalization of poverty, and that being another key factor in why people, get really stuck in a vicious circle inside of the criminal injustice system. And so, if we could talk some about how people, in Arkansas in particular, but people in general, all over our country and in our region, become trapped in the system. And if Zachary, you can begin and even talk to us about some of the work that you with Decarcerate are doing to address that.
Yeah. So Decarcerate's work sort of exists, particularly when we talk about the ways in which folks are, the poor folks are impacted in the court system. Our work is really trying to tackle this from both a policy, legislative end, and also a grassroots end. And some of that work is showing up in courts and challenging judges who have a lot of discretion. So we're getting ready to, we're developing and getting ready, hopefully soon, to launch a court watch program where folks can get straight into the courtroom and provide some accountability, do some data tracking. Furonda talked about just the utter lack of reliable data that's coming out of courts. I have a team of students, many of them law students that I was working with this past year. They tried for a year to get a list of all the fines and fees in Arkansas courts and where the money went. And they failed after a year because every single court, every single entity that they spoke with said that list don't exist. We don't even know what fines and fees we're collecting money on and who's getting that money. We don't even have a master list. So we're going to send some folks in to do some of this community-based data collection that we really need, and to try and start providing some of this public pressure on judges and prosecutors in the courtroom. And we're also going to try and tackle this from a legislative policy, but we ain't got time to wait for that. So we getting in the courtrooms too. So that's a little bit of the strategy, and I can talk more about that if folks are interested, but that's sort of how we're coming at this.
Reverend Davis, could I just jump in for a second? Because there was something you said at the beginning of this that I think is also important, that builds on this really important work that Zachary is doing, I think, at the real grassroots, is that I do think this is an opportunity to build across lines of difference. It's one of the few issues where actually you are seeing people of different theological views, different political views, who actually, who really are weighing in. I mean, the fact that the previous presidential administration actually did something around, now you can agree to how you agreed with it or not. The fact is that there are some openings here. And I think our challenge is, how do we pair kind of both this grassroots work that, Brother Zachary's doing, but also for that folks that really are across these political and philosophical and theological divides, actually to explore some common ground. And that's, I think, where I think faith communities can play an important role, that we can provide the table, we can be the leaders. Because oftentimes in some of our churches, whether we, like it or not, we've got, we have the person who's been formerly incarcerated, and we have the prison guard. We have, the mom who may not say anything, but whose daughter has been locked up in jail, but they're not saying anything in church. And so they're in our congregations too. So I think I want to kind of name that and lift that out as really an opportunity in this moment. And I think why I think this particular fellowship becomes really critical is to learn those tools, because we're not going to get anywhere by, everybody has a role, but we're not going to get much by just throwing stones at each other. Though it's important to be prophetic, and the prophetic has a place, but we also have to create some tables that build some bridges and build some power, and as a way to try to dismantle this beast.
That's a really important point, Reverend Vaughn, because what I hear part of what you're saying is the power of personal narrative, and I think a lot of us are disconnected from that, partly because as you alluded to, some folks shame, and the shame that our society, our church, which has an outmoded opinion factory in society, and which is why, Calandra, I appreciated the fact that in your paper, which is in its own way a good piece of long form journalism, because of all of the narratives that you have included. I think about the man in your area about debt accumulation, who talked about having his license suspended because he was behind on child support, but the child support he was behind on was while he was in prison for 2 years, and how he was fortunate that somebody was able to help him pay for his license, but without that license he very likely would not be able to work, which would put him farther behind on child support payments. And so how does I guess we talked about 2 things. one, the power of personal narrative in helping folks understand the perils of this system, and also, how it helps policymakers understand how on a very personal level. You think about a state like Arkansas, where we're 70+% white, so this affects poor white communities, not in a per capita way, not percentage wise, but it affects them just as much. But how powerful is personal narrative in helping policymakers understand the backwardness really of our system.
Is that question for me, Ryan? Yeah. Okay. No, just checking. I think it's really important that we include personal narratives. That is why I wanted to get the expertise. You mentioned the report a couple of times, but that report was really led by those who are impacted by the system. And I think that's important because a lot of times we're hearing stories from decision makers, policy makers who have no dealings with the system, who doesn't know what it's like to be locked in a cage or to have to wonder if you're gonna get locked up because you can't afford, some type of fine or fee. And so the people who, and even for us, even for folks who call themselves advocates, even for faith leaders, like you cannot do this work outside of those who are impacted by it. Those who are impacted have to be leading the conversation. They have to create the table. They have to tell us what the table needs to look like. And then we show up and we provide that support because they know. And so they create this narrative. And then with that, we have to kind of amplify and then help shift the narrative around what is happening. And so a lot of times, really simple, a lot of people are just like, there's some people who did some bad things. They need to be locked up so that they can no longer do the bad things, and that's it. And they just leave it at that. And they feel like, once they get out, everything is good again. Kind of neglecting the fact that our prison system just really works as a cage. It's not a rehabilitation system. And also neglecting the fact, again, that this system targets and was set up to target Black folks. And so that is why even in states where we see a large percentage of white people who are incarcerated, or a large percentage of the population, we still see that disproportionately that there's Black folks who are locked up. And so being able to shift the narrative allows for those who are impacted to really tell their own story, and then to use those stories to really shift policy and to make sure that we have policy that reflects those who are, again, impacted by the system.
And you also talked about, and I hope you don't mind that I keep referring to this this paper, but talked about impact on families, and I really think about that in context to what churches espouse to value. And so I'll leave this question wide open for anyone, because I know you all have some practical experience with how this impacts families. Mass incarceration, that is. And I don't mean just the prison part, because there's an expansive impact even post incarceration on families, especially since, as you observed again in the paper, that most families end up operating as what you term organic reentry programs. So if we can just talk in general about the impact. Furonda, I imagine in your practice, you've seen some of this about issues with reentry and the destabilization, really, of that incarceration, the wave of destabilization that incarceration causes from the point of the first day of incarceration until folks are out and beyond.
Sure. I think that probably my first observation of this was as a child, seeing members of the community just disappear from the community, and then people that you have not seen for years coming back, and the whole cycle of that and how that works, and watching people, even as a small child, try to be reintegrated into the community. trying to make meaningful, find meaningful employment, trying to be reacquainted with family, friends, children that have been left behind once this whole cycle of warehousing you has come about. And you know, as a child, I saw it because of the war on drugs. And now as an adult and as a lawyer that is working in the criminal legal system, I see how you know, jail and prison is the default. You know, there's treatment is not the default. Jail and prison is the default. Mental health awareness and assistance, that's not the default. Assisting people with poverty related issues, that's not the default. Jails and prisons are our default, and because of that, we have a system that is not, it's not designed to assist people with coming home from those jails and prisons and thriving outside of jails and prisons. That's not what our system does, and that's not the services that are provided to our returning citizens. Our system is set up to recycle them back into the jails or prisons, and we see all types of I mean, you cannot drink alcohol. It's a violation of probation to drink alcohol, to smoke marijuana, which we know, we have always known that this is a faith-based, we have always known that people self-medicate with all types of things, with marijuana, with all types of things. And we've criminalized that so that we can recycle people back into jails and prisons. We have not structured policy to identify and to deal with that fact that people are self-medicating. And we also have not modified our laws now to be punitive in that way. And those are some of the ways that we are recycling our citizens back into our jails and prisons, rather than having true and meaningful reentry that would allow someone to be successful, would allow them to, like Calandra's paper says, to pay child support so that they can get a driver's license, and so that they are not gonna have a ticket or warrant. They're driving on a suspended driver's license. Now their car has been towed. Now they need money to get the car out the tow. And now they're charging every day for storage because the car is at the tow. It's just a snowball effect. Is what we do to our citizens that are trying to return and reintegrate into society. And that is the default, and it should not be.
Earlier this month, we did a forum online called "If Moms Ran the Criminal Legal System." And so you'll see a copy of it on our website, www.endingmassincarceration.com, for the multi-faith initiative to end mass incarceration. What was really poignant about it is they were all moms, and they talked about almost feeling like they were incarcerated also, the way that they talk about the experience and the dehumanization that happens at every step, not just even for the person who's getting incarcerated or being held, but even for themselves. And so part of what they talked about is, look, see us as human beings, you know, and get me representation that actually wants to represent me, that isn't trying to just get me to take a deal so that they can move on to the next thing, that actually sees the humanity of who I am. And these were moms, they were Black, they were white, they were Latino, who were really talking about the ways in which it's a dehumanizing process. And so I think, you know, part of this is the importance of humanizing the process. And I think at the same time, and I think all the panelists have talked about this, is we need to, at the policy level, we need to advocate for laws that stop criminalizing, you know, that stop criminalizing people of color, that the default is to try to lock people up, versus trying to rehab, trying to support, trying to get into treatment. I mean, we're seeing great success throughout the country of these restorative justice programs, where people, you know, you see this in Brooklyn, New York, where you make the choice that instead of going into prison, you and the person who whom the crime has been committed against, they go into a restorative justice process. And so it is one in which, there's both telling the stories, there is apologizing, there's reconciliation, and there's a decision around, all right, here's what would make me whole, for you to do in order to, and so they avoid locking people up, but do this in a more humanized, authentic way. And so, so there are models out there, that can help dismantle this pipeline of people.
Brother Crow.
Yeah. I think for me, this we are talking about sort of the connections to faith. And, I come to this work through anti-death penalty work in Georgia. And what I saw over and over again was communities of faith going to church on Sunday, and we're going to show up on Sunday and we're going to worship a brown-skinned poor Palestinian who was incarcerated and executed by the state. And then on Monday, we're going to pretend like Jesus wasn't poor, Jesus wasn't a person of color, Jesus wasn't incarcerated, and Jesus wasn't murdered by a militarized police force, right? And so I think for me, this is very much an issue of faith. If we're gonna do the work and we're gonna be who we say we are, that means talking about prison. It means talking about the ways in which these systems that Jesus was killed for resisting against exploit and marginalize folks based on the color of their skin, based on their bank account, or lack of access to banking, right? And so for me, this does not feel at odds to who we are as people of faith, but the more in tune with the life of Jesus we get, the closer we get to prison.
This is really good for sermon prep. I like that. Gifting me so many things. I know.
Gotta wave my hand.
All right. The closer we, yeah. That made me think of in Reverend Vaughn when you talked about in the mass incarceration, the organization, and you all, your community at Ebenezer as a convener of that group. I think about their mission, the vision, that talks about bringing forth, institutional strength. And I think, churches, particularly churches in the Bible Belt, we know that we have that institutional strength, right? But it also talks about bringing forth moral vocabulary. And, I think, I have to wonder, I think about Dr. King's book, relevant in this thread, where do we go from here? And then, it talks about chaos, our community. Reverend Dr. Smallwood suggested that chaos and community are not necessarily juxtaposed, but they are two perhaps valid options. And how do we bring a moral vocabulary to bear, especially in spaces where folks think they kind of have the monopoly on morality, and folks who think that prisons are moral, that they have a moral purpose. We know that that's part of our puritanical Protestant ethos. The idea of prisons as just places. So how do we, especially in a moment where, again, you have folks from different ends of the political spectrum, rather, looking at reform, how do we bring forth a moral vocabulary, perhaps even in the form of what Calandra wrote? How do we bring forth a moral vocabulary? How do we convene around that? How do we coalesce when we seem to be so disparate? Even, I mean, somebody told me that, you know, was talking about Christianity and the power of it, and I always tell them there's not even agreement. There's never been in 2,000 years of Christianity even agreement among all Christians. You know, so how do we bring some agreement? You know, y'all are some radicals. How do you radicals get the Southern Baptists to agree?
Well, I think the seeds of this effort that we are part of, it was actually when Pastor Warnock, you know, had the initial vision, I think, for this work, is we need to sharpen our voice as faith leaders and as faith communities, and we need to not cede the moral ground, and that it is important for us to be more visible, more vocal. We, you know, in terms of talking about both the faith aspects of ending mass incarceration, and we have to continue to find ways to both show up around the strategies that will dismantle, you know, mass incarceration. And so, you know, part of what this initiative is about is narrative change and sharpening our voice. And so we're actually doing some of that training with our folks in New York. We're actually collaborating with a national group, some folks in the music industry with us, as well as some folks from the Players Coalition. These are some of the those NFL players who have on their own been doing advocacy work. So how could we begin to collectively look at narratives that can move some of the different constituencies that we care about or we think that can make a difference? And so, you know, we just need to not cede that. We're not ceding that ground. We have a voice. And so part of this, our effort is both developing those messages, training our leaders in them, and getting people to really sharpen their public voice around speaking to the issues of ending mass incarceration. And what's critical for us is that, you know, I don't come to this with the experience of the other brothers and sisters maybe on the phone who are kind of in the system in a particular way. I come as a faith leader. That's who I am. And so I have to speak as someone who is a person of faith who cares about this, who may know the issue, but that my sweet spot is the faith community. My sweet spot is about faith and the ways that this, and that we know, you know, what theologically this, you know, what this situation says to us, and the importance of being able to speak from a faith place. And that is our expertise. And so that's what we want to begin to develop, to sharpen, doing that both, you know, doing that in Arkansas as well as other parts of the country.
Furonda, you come from, whereas folks like Reverend Vaughn and I come from faith communities. You come from a certain, a very specific area of praxis, not only as an attorney, but someone who for years was the director of the Arkansas Coalition Against the Death Penalty. And I don't want to, you know, not address that. So before because we are rounding the corner here, and before we get to our final thought, I do want to ask you what the challenge is. What are the great legal challenges in our state system around the death penalty? We know that our governor just a few years back scheduled 8 executions to happen within about half as many weeks because we were afraid that our midazolam, our death penalty drug, was going to run out. So if you could just talk briefly before, again, we round the corner with our final thoughts about advice that you would give to anybody who's wrestling with or against the death penalty as a person of faith, but also as an attorney.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. For years, I worked as the executive director of the Arkansas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty. I'm now working in a role as director of leadership development for the Eighth Amendment Project, who helps to shape the national strategy for the death penalty movement here in the United States. And, you know, we ran into a lot of challenges here in the state of Arkansas. As you stated, back in 2017, the Arkansas AG, working in collaboration with the governor, they came up with this plan to set 8 executions in the matter of 10 days. And it was so ironic, but it was not ironic that they set that to, the first execution was scheduled to start the Monday after Easter Sunday. And as people of the Christian faith, we understand the significance of Easter Sunday and Good Friday. And, you know, during that time in 2017, we were out, you know, singing on the Capitol steps, you and Sister Tafara Muhammad, you know, singing on the Capitol steps, begging and pleading with our officials and our leaders to have a moral awakening, you know, if nothing else, you know, having a moral awakening. We knew that the Arkansas death row was racially discriminatory. It was disparately, Black people are impacted. Black people in the state of Arkansas are over 2 times more likely to receive the death penalty versus their white counterpart for the same class of crime, which is a capital crime. We knew that, and we were yelling and screaming at the top of our lungs to our officials and our leaders to change these policies, to give grace and a reprieve to these folks that were scheduled for execution, but that did not happen at the levels of our government. Our governor failed to act, and the court acted on behalf of some of those folks. And so we started off with 4 individuals that were Black and 4 individuals that were white, and we ended up executing 3 Black men and 1 white man. You know, and so there's a racial disparity in that. There, you know, if we are true believers of Christ, then we don't believe in murder. We don't believe for an eye for an eye, an eye for an eye. We might have, you know, way back in the Old Testament, that may have been the gospel, but we know that Jesus Christ came to save. And so there are so many, but I'm a novice Christian. You know, I'm not seminary taught or anything like that. And so when you go and you talk to members of the faith community about that, and they seem to find some justification for this heinous practice, for this unethical practice, for a practice that's not sanctioned by our Christian faith, you know, then we have a moral problem in our churches, in our faith community, when we can continue to support a practice like that. And so I'm asking for a moral revival of sorts. And in the way that we deal with, you know, the death penalty is the tip of the spear. That's the most severe punishment. That's the most severe way that our community is dealing with our citizens. And so we definitely need to abolish the death penalty, and we definitely need to re-examine the way that we treat our citizens, the way that we arrest, the way that we imprison our citizens, and then you know, the fact that we can choose to kill our citizens. South Carolina, and I will close. I sound like a Baptist preacher, Donna. In closing, you know, South Carolina just passed a bill that makes the available methods of execution the firing squad or the electric chair. So you get to choose, you know, which one you want to be your demise, and that is certainly not in line with the Christian faith, many other faiths, and that should not be in alignment with just American principles.
Yes, thank you for that. And we are right at our time, but I do want to extend an opportunity for each of you to leave us with some last words. You all know this conversation, the title of it is The Greatest of These, and I still believe in it. That 1 Corinthians 13 verse, which says, 3 things will last forever: faith, hope, and love. And the greatest of these is love. I know it gets so hard sometimes that we might say, what does love have to do with it? But what I see in all of you is love brought forth and in praxis. So I want to thank our panelists, and I'll reintroduce them and give them all, an opportunity to give us some last words. Thank you to Brother Zachary Crow, Executive Director of Decarcerate Arkansas, Reverend John Vaughn, Executive Pastor of the Historic Ebenezer Baptist Church, and convener of the Ending Mass Incarceration Faith Communities Working to Transform Justice. Thank you to Calandra Davis, Mississippi activist and policy analyst at the Hope Policy Institute. And thank you to Furonda Brasfield, the Rural Practice Incubator Project Attorney and former Executive Director of the Arkansas Coalition to Abolish the Death Penalty, who is now gratefully doing work nationally for the abolishment of the death penalty. So we'll begin with Ms. Davis. If you have any final thought for us.
Yeah, one, I really enjoyed this conversation and being amongst my people again, even if it's virtual. Two, although I have my own internal struggles with faith right now, I grew up a Pentecostal girl in rural Mississippi, and I can't deny the role that played in who I am today. And I've been hearing a lot of the moral argument that is against mass incarceration and that is against the death penalty and all of these many things. And that foundation is with me. And I just want people who are listening to this conversation to walk away with that regardless of your religion or how you identify, that there is a moral component to this. And that is really key and important that we uphold that as we continue to really move to a more equitable world. And then my philosophy is to have a radical imagination of what a world could look like beyond policing and beyond prisons. I didn't give my abolition spiel, but I think it's possible, and my radical faith is telling me that it's possible. So I'll stop there. You're muted.
You're on
Ryan.
mute, Ryan.
Sorry. Thank you again, Calandra. And I also know that, well, I'll just move forward. Reverend Vaughn, what's love got to do with it? Any final thoughts for us?
Well, I want to just say, Sister Davis, I tell you, faith that cannot withstand questions and struggles is not really a faith worth its salt. And so I'm certainly glad to hear that you're struggling with it and you're asking questions, and that's all right. And and that's the God that I serve. And so really grateful for your testimony. Thank you so much for this invitation, and certainly looking forward to exploring what the Multi-Faith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration might be able to do in partnership with faith communities and other partners in the ground in Arkansas. It's one of the areas that we've identified as a priority. And so we're looking forward to what that might be and being in conversation with other local faith leaders and other key partners like yourselves that are here on this call, ways that we can increase the engagement of faith communities on this issue, change the narrative, get faith communities more in the game around the policy work. So thank you for this opportunity.
Thank you. And Reverend Vaughn, I'm already printing. I don't know if y'all can hear it in the background. I got one of those old printers, but I'm already printing the resource and action toolkit of the Multi-Faith Initiative to End Mass Incarceration. So,
and it's a long book, but it is good. It gives faith communities concrete tools for what you can do, things you can do as a faith community to engage around this work. So thank you, brother.
Thank you. Brother Zachary Crow, who is a laborer, and I'm glad you've taken a break from your labors to get some writing in. You out there in the country. The reception didn't fail you. I was afraid of that. I know how the Wi-Fi is out there. Any last thoughts for us?
Yeah, so your question was what's love got to do with it? And what that makes me think of, I was raised in the Christian tradition. These last couple of years, this last decade, I've been most influenced and shaped by folks like James Cone and others out of the Black liberation theology tradition. And I think about King, who speaks of this beloved community. And then I think about my friends in prison who have been ostracized from any sense of community with folks on the outside. And so for me, part of the work moving forward is about figuring out how to create community with folks on the inside. And unless we got some love, that don't happen, because you know, the world wants us to talk about folks with numbers and not names, right? And right, so some of this about finding humanity in one another, and we don't get there without some love.
Furonda Brasfield, Attorney Brasfield, I imagine somebody who's had such a roving career, you know, somebody could have maintained herself somewhere in Milan doing high-end modeling as you've done before, but decided to do what you're doing. And so I have to ask you, what does love have to do with it? What your work and any final words you have?
Absolutely. You know, one of my favorite Bible verses is 1 Corinthians 13, and it gives us a directive on love, and it tells us what love is. One of the things about love is that it rejoices with the truth. And that's one of the things that I'm so happy about, that we're here today to tell the truth, and that we need more truth telling about what is actually going on in our state. You know, how for a lot of people, this is still a slave state. You know, the oppression is very real, and it's upheld. White supremacy is upheld in our criminal legal system. So we've got to rejoice in the truth. That's one of the things that love has to do with it. You asked me why I'm here. You know, love perseveres. And this is not an easy fight. You know, a lot of times we feel like we are running up against brick walls with our morals and values and what God said to do, you know, running up against these principalities. But love perseveres and love never fails. So I am honored to be here with this esteemed group of panelists and the moderator. And I think love has everything to do with it. And if we continue to love and continue to fight for the equity that will be the embodiment of love on this earth, then I think that we will not fail.
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you very much to our panelists. Y'all mind if I end with this? Somebody who I love well, I have his biography. The great Reverend Dr. Benjamin Elijah Mays would say this to his students at Chapel during his 40 plus years as president of Morehouse College. Would read this poem and said, I have only just a minute, only 60 seconds in it. Forced upon me, I can't refuse it. I didn't seek it and I didn't choose it, but it's up to me to use it. I must suffer if I lose it, give account if I abuse it. Just a tiny little minute, but eternity is in it. And I thank you all for spending this piece of eternity with us. I thank you for the urgency of your words. I thank you to Reverend Reverend Vaughn's point, for giving us the moral vocabulary to really reimagine how we can do, or in the case of abolition, not do incarceration. So I'm grateful to you all. Thank you for being here. Thank you for teaching me. Thank you for giving me notes for sermons. And I'm serious about that. So if y'all jump online and see me at church and you say something, I'm gonna give you credit, but I'm gonna say it more like I heard it said once. And I'll put you in the footnotes. God bless you, and I thank you. Turn it over to my good friend, Reverend Chantel Hill.
Thank you, everyone. Again, we so appreciate your time, your expertise, your passion, and your gifts. We do not take it lightly that you spent your time with us today. For everyone watching, please look out and listen up for the information about the Micah Fellows program. We will be launching soon. Appreciate you all, and God bless.